Right, so the case of Norway. The history of hormone pregnancy tests in Norway has, as in Finland, I believe Møller's paper, written paper that is, ended with, hasn't really been that contested. Now, this is something that I've been doing aside my PhD work, so it's, I just want you to know that it's kind of preliminary. And what I've been looking at, for the most part, is the Norwegian Medicines Agency's archive, which has been open to me in a way, not as difficult to access as the Finnish one, apparently. But before going on to what I'm going to do is sort of present more or less of a timeline of events in my country or in Norway and how this story rolled out. But before doing that, let me just say a few quick words on Norwegian drug regulation. It has been, well, somewhat of a special case internationally, as it is or has been the only country with a sort of need clause attached to the medically justified. So a new drug had to be medically justified and needed, all the way up until the 1990s when we started negotiating with the EU. And this was very much a part of the ideology of a very influential health director that we had in Norway from 1938 till 1972. His name was Carl Evang, and he held the seat for this entire period until his retirement then in 1972. And so it was the health director, both in theory and in practice, that appointed an expert panel and personally led the discussions and also made the final decisions for each drug. And what was kind of the ideology here? Well, it was a sort of less is more policy. Yeah, so the principle was that to make sure that number of registered drugs was kept to the lowest level possible. And this becomes relevant later as this sort of story develops. So that's sort of a little bit particular to Norway, and also what I thought was particular to my country, but now turns out not to be that particular because Møller has talked about this 5-year registration period. That was also the case in Norway at the time. A drug was only registered for 5 years, then it had to be revised, giving Norwegian authorities a possibility to revise the product, the need, and whether or not it was medically justified. If you have any questions as I speak, just raise your hand. Okay, so health director, I said. Well, subordinate to the health director was the Norwegian Medicines Agency. They were in charge of marketing authorizations, classifications, vigilance, pricing, reimbursements, and providing information on medicines to prescribers and the public. Now, so the process of, this is just one of the commercials, I'll get back to it. The process of registering, I like to move about, but somebody told me I have to stand here because of the microphone. So if you can't hear me, then just tell me. Anyway, the process of registering Primodos began in 1961 under the name of Bjorvik, the German name, as we've heard. And after some back and forth, because the Norwegian Medicines Agency, I'm just going to call that NOMA from here on after. The NOMA had their own laboratory, so they wanted to test the drug, and there was a bit back and forth. And in the end, they approved Primodos after having done all their considerations. What they based their approvals on, for the most part, or the 3 principles in a way, was, as I said, whether or not it was medically justified, whether or not there was a need for the product, if price was in proportion to value, and whether or not the advertising was considered appropriate. So it was finally registered in 1961 in packages of 2 tablets and 20 tablets. And the indications there were secondary amenorrhea, or menstrual irregularities, and pregnancy test. As you can see from this timeline then, it was not supposed to be revised until 1966, but it was already revised in 1961 1963 because they wanted to double the doses of active substances. So that was what happened in 1963. They reapplied because they wanted to double, and the NOMA agency said, okay, it's fine. And so they doubled the doses of ethinylestradiol and norethistron in 63. Now, around this period, a similar product was also registered in Norway, namely gynecosid, which was kind of the same thing, more or less, with a different manufacturer. Right, so for the next couple of years, until 1966, and who was it that talked about the intensive marketing campaign that was run in 66? Somebody did. Anyway, in 1966, Sharing ran quite an intensive marketing campaign. And this is one of the Sharing, I think this is Jesse's finding from the Sharing archive, actually. It's just an informational leaflet saying, okay, why is my period late? Doctor, we expect an answer from you. Okay, we'll just go back to the timeline. So, 1966, the registration is renewed, and nothing much happens until concerns start to emerge just after the publication of Isabel Gall's article in Nature in 1967. So in 1968, Norwegian physicians begin expressing concerns, but the question doesn't really end up on the table of the Norwegian Medicines Agency until 1970. So early in 1970, the Norwegian Medicines Agency have a board meeting in which they decide that the indication pregnancy test should no longer be a valid indication for Primodos or other equivalent hormone products. And why do they do so? Well, as I said, concerns had been around since 1968. But importantly also, in 1970, this researcher, Dagfinn Årskog, which was a professor in pediatrics and medical genetics, he publishes an article. It doesn't get published until June, but the NOMA agency receives a letter from him in February. So you see, this is kind of offers a nice parable to the story of Isabel Gall, who also, as I understood from the film, tried to sort of warn the authorities, which he also does. Before his research is published, he writes a letter to the NOMA saying, this is the outcome of my findings, I urge you to do something about it. And what has he found? Well, he is a medical geneticist and a professor in pediatrics. He's done a study of hypospadia amongst Norwegian infants, or not really only infants, but children. So the name of this article, when it was eventually published then in June, was Clinical and Cytogenetic Studies in Hypospadias. So hypospadias is a male birth defect in which the opening of the tube that carries the urine from the body develops abnormally. So his research then in this article investigated the material of like a huge material of hypospadic patients, 80 in total. But of interest to us, in this case, or to the NOMA board in the 1970s, was that all the mothers were asked about drug ingestion during the first trimester of pregnancy. And among these, remember, just keep in mind that there were 80, so there were loads of etiologies of hypospadia that he wanted to find out. But as it were, among these 80 then, a history of hormone usage in the early trimester of pregnancy was found in 5 mothers, their infants representing different stages of hypospadia. And the type of drug that they had been taken was confirmed also in 4 of the cases by either recovery of the prescription or statements from the mother's physicians. So that left 3 or 4 cases where this hormone procedure, treatment, had been used for the purpose of a pregnancy test, hence where the infant's hypospadias could be linked to hormone intake in the early pregnancy. And so, what Oslo concluded with, I mean, this is a long and very technical article on all sorts of possible causes of hypospadia, but let's just concentrate on this finding then. Well, this is perhaps a bit technical, but it's supposed to display the cases in which, the 3 or 4 cases in which hormones were taken, and to illustrate the different outcomes in terms of at which point in the early trimester of pregnancy you take the mothers had taken these hormones and the consequences, what the consequences would be. Right, so I'll just quote from his article. The information obtained in these experimental studies and the observations in the present study suggests that there might be a causal relationship between progestin treatment in early pregnancy and development of hypospadias. Although it cannot be claimed that there is a definite relationship between the occurrence of hypospadias and maternal progestin treatment, there is circumstantial evidence for suspicion of such a relation, and such suspicion should exhort to caution in giving such drugs to pregnant women. With the simple laboratory methods now at hand to test for pregnancy, there is no need for these potent steroids to be used for this purpose. And he continues, the mother should be asked about drug ingestion during the first trimester of pregnancy with special reference to any hormone treatment. It is our impression that a woman is not likely to report a pregnancy test with progestin as drug ingestion unless especially questioned on this point. This is in June 1970, but as I said, he reported this in a letter to the NOMA board already in February. So what did the NOMA board do in February? Well, they decided to remove the indication pregnancy test from the product, and they informed Sharing and AFI, which was the manufacturer of gynecosid. But they informed Sharing of this decision, and what did Sharing do? Or what did NOMA first say? Well, what the NOMA board said was, today, there are other more direct and completely undangerous diagnostic methods to indicate pregnancy, and this is why the indication pregnancy diagnostics from here on after will not be approved for hormone preparations. And actually, Sharing didn't really have any objection to this, but they countered by asking to keep the 2-tablet package on indication menstrual irregularities, secondary amenorrhea. And so NOMA not knowing exactly how to counter this, they asked what the board relied on was their close-knit relations to individual Norwegian physicians who acted as their special consultants, which is what they did in this case also. They approached one of their consultants, professor in gynecology, Oddmund Collard, who worked closely with Dagfinn Årskog, the other professor that we were talking about. So I'm just saying this just to illustrate how very small a country it is and how close-knit the relations between the board and its consultants and between the consultants also are, and to some extent, were and to some extent are. So Koller is given this problem then for him to comment on. What shall we do about this 2-tablet package? Is it okay for us to keep it on indication secondary amenorrhea? Because Sharing says it should be so. Well, Koller answers in the negative. He says that short-term amenorrhea and not caused by pregnancy should preferably be treated over a 10 to 14-day period. And since such preparations are already on the market, there's no indication to keep Primodos or gynecosid 2-tablet packages on the market. We could just go back to the other timeline here. So let's go back there. Right. So pregnancy test is removed, and Koller says then, no, we should not keep this 2-tablet package for secondary amenorrhea either, because there are other products to aid with that. So Noma returns to sharing with this, but still in 1970, just we haven't started with this yet, and repeats exactly what Koller said. No, we're not going to keep the 2-tablet package for secondary amenorrhea either, but sharing is still not completely ready to sort of cave in, and they send over all the German literature they have supporting that secondary amenorrhea should be an indication for this 2-tablet package of Primodos. But the Noma board dismisses these sources as outdated because they are from the 1960s, and repeats that the 2-tablet package will inevitably be deregistered as of September 1970. The 20-tablet package stays on the market, but that's perhaps a different story of less interest for some of the people here present. Right, so that's what happens. It is deregistered in 1970, but it stays on the market for secondary amenorrhea in 20-tablet packages. So, what happens next is that the new valid indications then, as I've said now, secondary amenorrhea and Koller, for some reason or other, just add suppression of lactation. And then the entry in the Norwegian Pharmaceutical Product Compendium, which is sort of, well, an encyclopedia of drugs that doctors at the time would sort of carry with them or have in their offices. The entry for Primodos is altered to, well, include precisely these indications. And that's Koller's work. That's what he's done. He's sort of altered that entry on behalf of the Norwegian Medicines Agency. But as he completes that in early August 1972, sharing reapplies for a renewal of registration for the 20 package because it's about to go out. Their sort of license is running out in January 1973. So they want to renew it. And the Noma board doesn't really know what to do, it appears. So they return to Koller, who, as I said, just completed the new entry in the sort of encyclopedia of drugs, and ask him to give a comment on the indications and contraindications on whether or not this product is medically justified. That was just for the sake of drama. Right, okay. And it appears that Koller must have changed his mind because by January 1973, he no longer sees that there is any point of having Primodos on the market at all. His response is as follows, I quote, "Secondary amenorrhea has not really been an adequate indication for the situation at hand. That is, in this particular situation, a woman would not really see her doctor if the possibility of pregnancy was not present. I cannot see that there's any need for this medication in cases of real secondary amenorrhea." And that sort of settles it for the Norwegian Medicines Agency board. And in a February meeting in 1973, they rule that all hormone products or Primodos and gynecocid 20-tablet packages are no longer medically justified. But as I said, the 2-tablet packages on indication of pregnancy tests had by then already been off the market for 2.5 years, since 1970. Okay, along comes 2014. As I said, the Norwegian history of this has not been nowhere near as contested as I now learnt that it has been in this country. Fortunately, I should say, for Norway. But what happens 2 years ago then, as Dagfinn Årskog passes away, we remember the professor with the article, is that the UK Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency requests information from the Norwegian Medicines Agency about the historical regulatory action taken in Norway. And the NOMA returns with a sort of brief version of what I've just related to you. And what they've done subsequently about that information, I do not know. So in terms of concluding, and I suppose maybe trying to give an answer to a previous speaker's question on who's given priority here. Is it the patient and the public health, or is it the pharmaceutical industry? I think it's rather safe to say that in Norway, patient and public health have come first. Also, just reminding you of the particularities of the Norwegian case. It was, as I said, characterized by these close relations between the Norwegian Medicines Agency's board and its consultants. This need clause, is there a similar product on the market? Do we really need this? We don't need Primodos 2 package because we already have all these new other ways of testing for pregnancies, so we don't need it. The less is more principle to make sure that the number of registered drugs were kept to the lowest level possible. All of these things then contributed to the relatively early banning of hormone pregnancy tests in Norway. Thank you.